Hello and welcome to live event number 19. My name is Jeff Rolka. Welcome. This is the weekly office hours that I host to answer questions, say hello, those kinds of things. So the chat is open. If you've got a question, type it in there or just say hello. Please do not be shy. If you have a question, it's quite likely that someone else would benefit from it as well, and that's what we are here to do. Before I get started, if you've chosen to subscribe, thank you. If you haven't yet, I hope that you'll choose to do so, and there's a little icon in the bottom of your screen that you can click on. And that's really about it. Had a couple questions that were sent in. A really fun one that came in actually today, and I wanted to address that first just because I don't get so many music theory questions, and music theory is something that I'm very, very, very fond of. I enjoy it quite a lot. I find it to be very intriguing. Hello, Susan. Welcome. Again, it's good to see you pop up. So they asked about singing a minor fourth. How do you sing a minor fourth? And I said, sure, I'll talk about it tonight. And they said, that's great because it's all about Alice in Chains and getting their kind of harmonies, their vocal harmonies. So vocal harmony question goes, pretty much right to the top of the list because that is so frequently on the minds of people on the channel. So a couple things, first of all, and hello to you, Aldo, as well. Thank you for joining us again. There's no such thing as a minor fourth. Now bear with me for a moment as I say that. I'm not saying that the actual intervallic equivalent that one might call a fourth that is not as wide intervallically doesn't exist. Of course it exists, but we would never call it a minor fourth. Fourths, fifths, and octaves are referred to as perfect intervals. And so they are either perfect, augmented, or diminished. We don't talk about them in terms of major or minor. There are major seconds, there are minor second or major and minor seconds, major and minor thirds, major and minor sixths, and major and minor sevenths. So it's either a perfect fourth or a diminished fourth or an augmented fourth that we're talking about here. And I couldn't really remember exactly what happened in the Alice in Chains music, so I went and had to listen to a couple tracks really, really quickly. And it was interesting because they do in fact use perfect intervals quite a lot in their harmonies. What you'll notice is that the perfect interval will jump in for a brief moment and then the lead singer will take over to finish the phrase, or vice versa. They'll start the phrase and then the harmonies will come later. And I think that they probably did that because motion in perfect intervals, when everything is a perfect interval apart, whether it's perfect, augmented, or diminished, starts to sound very monophonic, which is to say that we lose the distinction of the voices. And there's actually a name for it. It's called organum. And it was the original harmony that we had back in the Middle Ages. They would sing in organum. So it'd be all these perfect fourths and perfect fifths moving around. And what Alice in Chains does, and I only looked at like 3 examples briefly. Good afternoon, JC's Radiant Ray. Hello. I had a look at a couple really, really fast examples. And so in one of them, the melody is like... And what happens is right at the end of that phrase, you get the harmony part. And those are perfect fifths. And they move in parallel. It's called parallel motion. When you have a perfect fifth, and then it moves to a different note, and each voice, so in this case the lead vocal and the harmony vocal, move to another note together, and they move to the same interval. It's called parallel motion. In classical harmony, we avoid this because you lose that distinction. But that's what the effect that they're creating in their songs, and it's really kind of cool. And just FYI, that's F and C and E flat and B flat, both a perfect fifth apart. Interestingly enough, in the other example that I listened to, the lead vocalist was like on B flats and A flats up above middle C, and there you had the harmony part on F. And then I actually didn't listen to that one very carefully, I have to admit, but I know they started on an F. And what that is a perfect fourth. And when you have a lead vocalist who has such a wide accessibility to range, you can often have what would be a harmony below the lead vocal. And so what they've done there is a perfect fourth is effectively a perfect fifth, but inverted. So they're utilizing the same kind of interval, the same kind of relationship between the two notes. It's just that they've inverted the roles so that the lead vocalist is on top. That's a little bit confusing. Let me put it this way. If I have F to C, and that's a perfect fifth, C to F is a perfect fourth. So when you flip them over like that, you get the same perfect interval, or the same two notes, but a different interval by name. This is still very confusing. How to explain intervallic inversion? Capone, hello, you're going to the sauna. Come back later. Vibrato exercises coming. I sent some vibrato exercises out not too long ago. I can certainly do more. Enjoy the sauna. I am envious of your sauna. I guess you're an hour later, isn't it? 7 p.m. where you are in Finland, if I'm not mistaken. Enjoy. Hope it's not too hot. And good morning to you, Gerald Ryan. Midnight or 1 a.m. in the Philippines, I believe. It's good to see you, and as always, I appreciate going the extra effort to be up in the middle of the night to join us here. So the chat's open. I think I'm going to let it go on enharmonic equivalence. Let's just go ahead and say that Alice in Chains uses perfect fourths and perfect fifths really, really frequently in their harmony parts. And really, really cool was this other one. What song was that? That might have been Nutshell, where you had the lead vocalist on A flat and the harmony part on D flat. So that's a perfect fourth. And they were alternating between the perfect fourth and the two fourths apart. So G and C, A flat and D flat. And so again, using the perfect fourths, perfect intervals, that's basically going to be your recipe towards getting an Alice in Chains kind of sound. That and a lot of power chords and sort of slithery bass lines. The one tune, just very, very slithery, not a wide range, just kind of slinking around down there. And that's going to also help you do a lot of that stepwise motion in your lead vocal and harmony vocal parts and keeping the perfect intervals working. You'll probably want to also avoid most what we would call major or minor chords. So stick to power chords, 1, 5, and 1 in your guitar parts and things like that. That will make it so that you don't get any conflicts with the thirds of your triads. And the original question, how do you sing a minor fourth? Well, again, we would call it a diminished fourth. And interestingly enough, a diminished fourth actually sounds like a major third. So here's a perfect fourth. And if I lower the fourth scale degree by a half step, it's a major third. So a diminished fourth, intervallically speaking, is equivalent to a major third. We wouldn't call it a major third unless it were truly a major third. But that's a music theory thing. That depends on where the note exists in the key that you're working in, whether or not we'd call it a diminished fourth or we would call it a major third. So I hope that helps. That was quite the music theory question. Let me see what I've got on screen here. Capone is off to the sauna. I wonder if I could do a live event in the sauna. I don't think the keyboard would suit it very well, but I don't know if I would actually do very well in a sauna. Singing would probably be like one big steam room for my voice. Okay, unlikely source. Hello. This seems an esoteric question, but how would you define the magic in music? I suppose it differs from person to person, but what does it mean to me? I love that question. That's an awesome question. And I think in this is our live event. I feel like we can go as esoteric as we please. Okay, so what that reminds me of, and what I have always tried to go for in my own performances, is I'm a very fond reader of science fiction. Like, I will read almost any sci-fi. I do maintain this one rule: if it has a sword on the cover, I generally don't do it. It's got to be a really special case. Like, if there's a sword on the cover, then you got to sell me on it. But generally speaking, most science fiction I will read without any prodding. And in fact, from the masters like Asimov and Heinlein, and Philip K. Dick, like I sort of have to seek out obtuse writings and magazine articles and things like that. But there was one book I read a long, long time ago called Songmaster, and I do not recall the author. However, it was this alien world, and they would train them as vocalists. You can kind of see where I'm going with this. But the one thing that I remember and have always taken away from it, as odd as it may sound, was that when they would train them to sing, they meant to fill every cubic inch of the room that they were singing to, but not any more nor any less. That as they sang and performed, they were meant to occupy all available physical space, like the essence of the song, if you will, the je ne sais quoi of the music was meant to be in that space. And whether I'm using amplification or not, that is what I always try to tune myself into. And what it now comes to mind as is a push and a pull between myself and the people that are listening to me. So, this is probably almost entirely all in my mind, although I feel in my heart that it translates. But there's a way to play the room where you can kind of push on them a little bit with how you're approaching the music, and then you can kind of pull back, and it gets this thing going where you can get like a little push and a little pull and a little push and a little pull, and it's like a wave, and it kind of goes back and forth into these greater oscillations. And after a while, we're all in this together. And that to me is pretty magical. I don't get that all the time. Sometimes it's really, really hard to even get it started. But when that starts to occur, when we're communicating in this way, and it's mostly done, if I had to reduce it to any one element, it's volume. It's controlling, it's a very adamant and deliberate control of the volume that I'm playing at. So as I'm moving through, even if I have a set list, as I'm moving through it, I may switch things around on the fly in order to play the room a little bit better. And I feel like that's where the magic starts to occur, as an ensemble, not a band, but as an ensemble, in that we're all in this together. Now, if you're doing this in a wine bar, you're an acoustic singer-songwriter, and doing this in a wine bar, this can be a tough crowd. And that can be a great place to try things out and see how it works, and what you have to do, what lengths you have to go in order to start that process happening. But once it happens, you can be amazed at how you can control the volume of the room. Because even in and I'm speaking from experience of playing in wine bars, even in a crowd that seems adamantly to be ignoring you, when you pull your volume back, all of a sudden the volume in the room drops, and then you can push and pull, and you can insert yourself into those spaces when there are gaps, when the volume drops. So that's part of the magic of it. that's perhaps the magic of the performance of all of us together in a room together. I think there's magic in a beautiful chord change. I think there's magic in a melody that suits a chord progression so well, or suits a particular person's voice so well. I'm a big melody person. I love melodies. I think that there's magic in an ensemble when they've been playing for a long time together, or if they've really, really rehearsed well and they're a well-oiled machine, as the saying goes. That can be very, very magical. That doesn't need an audience, quite frankly. And speaking as a person who's spent more time in practice rooms than on stages by a vast, vast sum, the best performances I've ever given, except for maybe 2 or 3, have always been in the practice room. That's or in a lesson. So there've been very few witnesses for those times, but that doesn't take anything away from the magic for me. It's just that no one else got to see it in most of the time. I hope that, at least in part, answers some of that question. That was a beautiful question. Where we go? Saunas. Maz, yeah, that's right. Parallel motion. It's gonna come. Embrace it. Embrace the music theory. Music theory is our friend. Music theory is our friend. Patricia, hello, and hello to you. One question about the role of the middle and or back of the tongue. I love it in helping achieving good high notes. Okay, I have noticed some teachers encourage free lifting. So you said you've got the long live sci-fi, and that actually took me aback because I was actually, when I first moved to California back in 1997, I joined a band called Sci-Fi, and it's still out there. Somewhere out in the ether, you can actually find a photo of me. I think the photo of me that was I made it into Macworld magazine, and I'm dressed up as a Borg, of all things. If you know what if the Borg from the Star Trek franchises, I dressed as a Borg every once in a while to play in that band. But no, you're not talking about sci-fi. You're talking about the middle of the tongue, and many times at the flat tongue all the way through the back, in the extent that I can see Campania in those singers. Back. I can see. Okay, so I'm not a big fan of lifting the middle of the tongue, and I'm certainly not a big fan of getting the tip too high in general. The fact is that in singing songs, some consonants will require you to lift it, and we want it to be available for those consonants. The middle of the tongue will sometimes lift when we do adaptations of some hard consonants, like a K sound requires a lot of middle tongue. And if it's disrupting a phrase too much, I recommend somewhat changing it towards a German CH. That'll lower the middle of the tongue a little bit. It'll soften the K. The main thing is that it will stop disrupting the airflow quite so much. And that's the most important part about it, is that we want to keep the air moving, particularly when we're up in the upper register. If there are teachers out there that are encouraging free lifting, I would want to know the context before I weighed in on it too dramatically one direction or another, because it's going to lift when we sing consonants from time to time. The most important aspect about the tongue is that it remain flexible. If it locks in position, that's when we start to really get into trouble. That's when that additional tension in the oral cavity is going to start affecting our vocal production. Susan Taylor, I feel kind of silly because I can't think of anything to ask. I'm just glad you're here. You don't have to ask any questions. Say hello, chime in. I believe also if I'm not mistaken, in the past, you've helped me understand some questions that have come on screen, and that is incredibly helpful too. So it's all good. I'm just glad you're here. Patricia, long live sci-fi. Aldo, Susan, talking about Susan. I wanted to ask about harmony, and now I'm just listening to every answer. Excellent. Bike Men, good day. I am glad that you are here as well. Welcome. Susan Taylor, enjoy the videos. Yes. Patricia, continue my question. I read that one. JC's Radiant Ray. I have always wondered if there are more breaks than commonly discussed. I seem to have a break or something between C4 and D4. Descending past D4 forces a difficult change in delivery. Yes, you are correct. We often simplify vocal production in the interests of keeping things moving quickly. If you wanted to be a singing instructor, then perhaps that would be cause for delving more into the musculature and the specificities of how our vocal production breaks down. But you're right. What you're noticing there, what you're noticing at that point between C4 and D4 is more of getting almost entirely thyroarytenoid dominant. In my videos and in my teaching, I talk about thyroarytenoid dominant singing and cricothyroid dominant singing. Thyroarytenoid dominant is meant to be chest voice. Cricothyroid dominant is meant to be head voice. The reality is that in a well-balanced tone production, you're kind of using them all the time. Like, you're never really only using the thyroarytenoid dominant muscle until you get down to the very bottom of your range, and that's what you're feeling there at that C4 transition. Because as you get down to A below middle C, you're at the bottom. There's not much. If there's any bottom beneath that, it's not a lot. And then, of course, we get the primo passaggio up higher up in our ranges. That usually gets glossed over because most vocalists, in working on their thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice, there's almost always airflow exercises that are worked into that. And those airflow exercises, in conjunction with the appropriate phonation of the vowels, in other words, keeping them narrow so that they stay on the vocal fold properly, means that you'll almost always skip right past the primo passaggio. In my videos, if you want to know more about where your primo passaggio is, you can practice the videos that are of your range but don't go up above the secondo passaggio. Or the vowel modification videos, like the new vowel modification videos that came out a couple weeks ago. The places that I call for your vowels to start modifying is right about your primo passaggio. That's where that is. Again, this is speaking generally for the voice types as represented in the videos. Everyone's a little bit different, so you may be a little bit different, and different vowels will behave a little differently too. So most of us kind of skip over the primo passaggio. The secondo passaggio, everyone calls the break. Most people are really familiar with that. And then the next passaggio up above that is where we enter into this falsetto tone production, where the ligament on the outside of the vocal fold is the primary tone producer. And in that, the vocal fold proper is being held mostly static. And I still owe the channel a video on that. I promised the channel a video on that a couple weeks ago. But I haven't really been feeling awesome the past couple weeks. I had like some weird, it wasn't a cold, but it was funking out my voice a little bit. And then last weekend, I'm not sure what happened. I think I got a little bit exhausted. And so I had some migraine headaches and a bunch of other stuff, and I was kind of out of the picture for a couple days. I was just functioning on the minimum. And I haven't really felt up for doing a really, really super high range video. But I'm feeling better now, and hopefully in the coming weeks I will do that. It is on my list of videos to do, so that will come out, and that will address that upper transition that most of us encounter. Getting into the whistle register is tricky, which is up above that, because I did a bit of research on that. There was a request that came in, and when we're in the whistle tone, the epiglottis plays a much more active role, and it covers the vocal folds. So it, in fact, is more like a whistle than the vibrating folds of the tissue. And I need to do a bit more experimentation before I deal with any of that stuff, really. I hope that answers the question, by the way, JC's Radiant Ray. Let me check the... we're still experimenting with... Yeah, okay. Looks like I'm still clear enough to be seen. If I get too dark, someone tell me in the chat, please. I did turn on some little Christmas tree lights here in the room to keep a little bit more light on, because I know I got really dark last week. Unlikely source. Stop Making Sense would define it for me. A most effective antidepressant. Gabriel's stage shows years ago and even today can fit in that category as well. Of course, REM. Yeah, Gabriel was amazing. I saw him years ago. I've only watched Psycho Killer from Stop Making Sense. I really need to watch the rest of that. Although I have read his book, which was excellent. I thoroughly enjoyed the book that he did. Absolutely fantastic. Bike Men. More like little and multiple domes in your head. Gerald Ryan. I do your vocalization exercises every day, and I'm improving a lot. Intervals exercises. Excellent. Thank you very, very much. You are most welcome, and I am absolutely thrilled to hear that they're working out for you. That is fantastic. Keep up the good work. It is certainly the videos can help, but it's your work ethic that's doing the job. You know, keep it up. Unlikely source. I know from tough crowds, but I've also encountered that magical connection with the audience. Perhaps they're responding to the song and not the singer, but it still lards my skillet. I understand it, but I have not heard that one. I like it. Yeah, I think there's beauty in a song. Some songs just require a conduit. They don't necessarily require a performer, if you get my drift on that one. I can dig Vulcans. How does California feel? Is it like in the movies? Okay. So first of all, of course, I'm in England right now. I lived in California from 1997 to 2013, and then my family and I moved here to England. And California is a very, very big place, and it depends on where you live. If you want to experience what it's like in the movies, I wouldn't really go to LA. I mean, that's where the movies are made, but go to San Diego. Like that is movie California. Massive sandy beaches. I mean, if you eat fish, I have yet to have better fish tacos. And they were like all kinds. It was like fish and squid and shark and all kinds of different tacos. Amazing food. And then just, giant beaches, huge sunsets. Where I lived was up north. I lived just outside, across the bay from San Francisco in Oakland, California. My office was at between 5th and 6th on Mission Street, so right behind what would be now Twitter. That's where my office building, my office in San Francisco was. And San Francisco in the Bay Area is a bit more kind of artsy, crunchy, very, very health-oriented, very... What the phrase that comes to mind is hike your own hike. It's a saying in backpacking where you got to hike your own hike. If you want to go out and hike the John Muir Trail, there are many, many, many different ways to do it. Do it the way that is going to satisfy you. Hike your own hike. And that's kind of how the Bay Area feels. It has changed a lot in the years that I lived there. When I got there, of course, Green Day had just broken, and I was playing all kinds of clubs and doing all sorts of different things, and it was really fun. It was really, really fun. Lots of dive bars, lots of really kind of grungy, cool venues to play. And the sort of dubious honor that I feel I can state is that I closed so many of those clubs and was like the last performer at so many of those clubs as I weathered the first .com bust and then got into the next boom, which is of course still now ongoing, and now it's changed quite a lot. Most of those clubs, long gone. But it's lovely. And then the further north you go, the further crunchy it gets. It gets, you get to Inverness, and you're talking about like crystal shops and candles and things like that. And if that's your thing, that's really, really cool. It's lovely. Inverness is beautiful. The thing about California is wherever you go, the nature is astounding. Yosemite, Kings Canyon, Joshua Tree, beautiful. Death Valley. Really, if you can make it, worth the trip. I'm remembering this time, I tried to do a station identification, half past. My name is Jeff Rolka. Thank you for joining us for this week's live event. If you're a subscriber, thank you. If not, I hope that you'll consider doing so now. The chat is clearly open, so please get your questions in. Greg, sometimes I find that after 45 minutes of singing, I find it tough to sing in falsetto. Sometimes it'll work and it wavers, or it'll whiff and there'll just be air flowing through my throat. When you say the word falsetto, I assume that you're meaning if you're a tenor, anything above B4, so right by high C, right by C5. If that is in fact the case, it's quite likely the fact that in using those muscles, they get a bit more blood flowing into them and they get a little bit more weight to them. You'll also notice too that as the vocal folds get engorged with blood and start getting used more, you'll lose a few notes on the low end. And you'll have to do different things in order to sing those notes. Try. We talked about this last week to a certain extent with octave arpeggios. But with but this is a different question. After 45 minutes, again, my suspicion is that there's a little bit too much weight on the vocal fold to make a sufficient transition. So the way to assess it, when you get to that point, notice the direction of travel. So notice if you're singing an ascending or a descending exercise or piece of music. And let's say you're singing a piece of music and it has an ascending line that goes through that register of your voice. Stop, do it in reverse, and see if you can begin in that range and work your way down. And if you can be successful, try to be aware of the sensation. What does it feel like now that you're fully warmed up and you're using your voice? Try to notice the sensation. Be aware of that feeling. Notice how much engagement and airflow you're using. If you're still unsuccessful, try the lip trill and see if you can be successful there. Again, working it in reverse. When you're consistently getting it and working it way down, flip it around and then see what happens. If you've done it successfully several times descending, and it won't work ascending, then you're dealing with an old predisposition. You're dealing with an old habit where even if it's slightly, like in that range of your voice, a slight amount too much vocal fold engagement is going to force everything to collapse on you. That'd be the place to start to try to figure out what's going on. If it's a piece of music too, it could also depend on the vowels as well. But usually that high up, most vowels are so wide it hardly matters. Try descending. Try taking the lick from the piece of music out of context, working it in reverse if it's ascending, and see what happens. Patricia, uvula, got it. Yes, quite flat in the back. Keeping in mind, when people belt, there's a certain amount of muscle tension that they retain that I wouldn't necessarily recommend. and for that matter, the aperture of their mouth in general may not necessarily be appropriate to the vowel if you aren't belting. Belting has a little bit different set of rules, and there's sort of there's a bit more overall engagement in the soft tissues when you're doing that anyway. If you are making a transition through the secondo passaggio, so in other words, you're going from thyroarytenoid dominant to cricothyroid dominant, you're connecting the registers rather than belting. Then the same rules don't really apply to us. We have to function on a different rule set. Greg, you're talking to Aldo, but you're right. Traffic in the cities is really, really horrible, and the weather is astounding. I can remember one time getting stuck in San Francisco trying to get home from the airport, and it took me 2 hours to go a mile on the 80 getting to the Bay Bridge. It was unbelievable. You're welcome, JC's Radiant Ray. Live long and prosper to you as well. Unlikely source. Where is your visual focus on stage? I find myself looking for signs from the audience that they're engaged. So I'm not sure how well my video comes through because I had to adjust the resolution in order to make it so it flowed smoothly. But right now I'm looking right at the green dot, which is in my mind every one of you out there. I'm talking to you, and that's what I look at. When I'm on stage, I look about there. So now I can see the green dot out of my lower peripheral vision, but I'm really looking at the wall beyond the green dot. Especially if I'm feeling a bit worrisome on stage, if I'm feeling the butterflies a little bit, or if it's a really tough crowd, I'll look out over them. If they're a really, really tough crowd, I start making eye contact to try to engage people. The most important thing, however, that I think of in addressing this is to try as hard as you possibly can to not look at the microphone. It's really, really easy to get caught up in the microphone in your peripheral vision, and what will happen is you won't support as much. And that can start this cascading process of problems with vocal production. So we really have to look past the microphone. It's not such a huge deal on a live stage because, of course, the microphone's not a huge thing. But in the studio, when you've got a big condenser mic hanging in front of you, it can really, really impede a nice vocal performance to have that thing hovering in front of you. Maz, thank you. I am feeling much better. I have a problem with unattainable perfection. I'm never ever satisfied with my recordings, as I always think I can do better. How can I get past that? I love that question. That's a great question. Okay. So I used to feel like a perfectionist, and I used to tell people I was a perfectionist. And I stopped because I don't think that there is any such thing. Even if you were to listen to a performance and say, wow, like that person, that was perfect. That was absolutely perfect. Someone else might come along and say, no, it was mechanical. It wasn't emphatic enough. It wasn't X, Y, Z. The notion of perfection is relative to the person observing the performance. And I can almost guarantee you that any quote unquote performance that sounds perfect, if we were to put it on a strobe, a tuning device, it would not in fact be absolutely perfect. The notion of vibrato itself introduces inconsistencies in the voice. It's a fluctuation in pitch. By definition, vibrato is an imperfect way of producing pitch, changes the pitch. So I started to let go of that a long, long time ago, and it kind of took a long time to be okay with the notion of doing my best. And that's kind of what I've come to. I've kind of come to the notion that I'm always going to keep on trying to do my best, and I'm never actually going to achieve it, and that's okay. That and some would describe this as actually as mastery of a concept, that the ability to conceive of something better than what you are currently capable of producing is the notion of mastery, that we're always looking a little bit further down the line. Now, this becomes problematic in recordings because either you run out of money in the recording studio, or if you have your own studio and you record yourself, then you never ever record anything and release it. And the solution that I came at for that was the idea of recordings as snapshots. And that was part of the reason why I became a recording engineer. I did a 2-year internship in San Francisco, and then stayed on to engineer at the studio for many, many years afterwards. But I learned to do that because I wanted to record myself. I never wanted the ability to hire a recording studio to impede me from creating recordings. I didn't actually imagine that most of that equipment would be used for making voice teaching videos on YouTube, but I'm glad it is. But that's why I became a recording engineer, was so that I could always record myself, take that snapshot, listen to it, and move on. Take the next snapshot, move on. Take the next snapshot, and move on. So, unfortunately, I don't know, that's not really a solution. That's not a solution to perfectionism, but that's my solution for how I deal with that notion of, I can hear this a little bit better. I can hear this a little bit clearer. I can hear it a little bit smoother. I can be just a bit smoother through the secondo passaggio, and then I can sing with just a little bit more openness in this range. That's fine. I'm going to take the snapshot, and I'm going to do it again next time. Victoria Lightfoot Smith, hello to you. I warm up to your full range warm up for soprano every day. Thank you. That's awesome. Although I am classically trained, I love to sing rock. Do you have any advice to improve and expand my belting range? My advice to you is to be careful. Be careful, and I would advise you to hold yourself to strict limits on what range you are going to do with your belting. So, presumably, with your previous training, you know where your secondo passaggio is. I would impose a self-limitation on belting of a major second, maybe a minor, major third, depending on your voice. Like you kind of gotta sort of suss that one out over time. Because the last thing in the world I would want to see is, to start belting a lot more frequently and then start having to take more time off, or start dealing with excessive vocal fatigue, or any of the number of other things that people who exclusively belt deal with. You have the benefit of your training, which is fantastic. So you can take advantage of that belting profile up to a certain point, and then always switch out for more cricothyroid dominant singing for much, much higher notes. And that's going to save the fatigue on your voice and hopefully prevent all the pitfalls that are normally associated with belting. Unlikely source. Regarding the skillet, a Southern boy. Excellent. Excellent. Gerald Ryan, I hope you do volume. Yes, I've got it on my list, Gerald Ryan. The volume control video is on the list. Full range, yeah, I'll throw a couple full range. I'll throw a couple full range patterns into it. I can do that. Unlikely source. California is a country unto itself. In it, it really doesn't have a unified identity. It really is. It's It really is just a big, big place. And of course, the Jefferson County, California, wanted to split off and be its own state. And every once in a while, there's a petition that goes around that they try to get that passed. Aldo's going to be in the Mission, September 2017. It's going to be awesome. You got to go to La Taqueria, best burritos in all the United States. It's like 25th in Mission. Unlikely source, lived in SF and across the bay. It has grown expensive. That's true. Unlikely source, do you ever listen to KFJC out of Foothill College? Maybe. But I'm going to check it out now. I do have to make a note of it. Falsetto. It's weird. I'm reading Greg's question here. It's weird because before I've done any singing, I can sing it totally fine. It's just after a while I struggle. It sounds like you're just struggling to get coordinated once the tissues get warmed up and there's a bit more blood flowing to them and they're kind of ready to fire a bit more. Like I said, you'll notice the same thing happen at the very, very bottom of your range. Be light. Be super, super light with those pitches as you're descending. Or go for the out of balance sound just to get the mechanics of it so that you get the feeling of it. Again, when I'm in that range, it feels very glassy to me. And I can feel a little bit of the thyroarytenoid engagement happening to allow the ligament to vibrate more. And perhaps you're also resisting that engagement. That could be part of it as well. Yeah, you're going to have to experiment a little bit with that, but start with descending phrases. Greg also seems to have a different timbre later on in the session than before. Makes me wonder if I'm putting strain on my voice when I practice, but doesn't feel like there's any when I practice, even in my newly found cricothyroid dominant notes. Interesting. I was under the impression that you had been doing I was under the impression that you had access to your cricothyroid dominant range for a long time. That somewhat, if you're new to CT dominant singing, it could very well be a coordination issue, getting the vocal fold to slow down so the ligament can take over in that range. But again, you're doing it before you're fully warmed up. So that is interesting. That is a very interesting question. It would be interesting to hear you. Bikemen, we as artists continue to practice to reach perfection, but a true artist always believes they can improve, therefore reaching another level of performance. I concur. That is exactly right. Hence my new favorite quote. My new favorite quote by Pablo Casals, a cellist of note from not too long ago, in an interview when asked, he was 90 years old, and in the interview they said, you're 90 years old, why are you still practicing? And his response, because I think I'm seeing progress. Of course, exactly. And I think that's just what it is, somewhat by definition, to be a musician, or as Bikeman is saying, as an artist. We're always conceiving of what the next thing is going to be. We're always looking a little bit further beyond where we currently are. That's kind of like the story of all my technical progress. I'm always trying to go a little bit further with what my technical facility is at a given skill. Maz, to get all zen about it, it's the process, not the result. Yeah, exactly. Which is 180 from how we're indoctrinated, isn't it? Not easy, but when we can forego worry over how we do, we allow ourselves to get as close as we're able to that perfection. I love that. That's lovely. And I think exactly right. It is about the process. There's a video or an audio interview, I think that Tony Robbins did with John Wooten. And you talk about, like, John Wooten talking about his basketball team and the practices. And one of his requests of them is, like, to live well between practices, because you can undo far more between practices than I can ever train you to do in a practice. And as musicians, to me, what that means is that we're on the stage for unless you're, I don't know, Justin Timberlake, and you're touring constantly, or those bands that tour forever, right? And you're always on stage. Unless you're on tour and you're always on stage, most of the time we're practicing. We're working towards that stage or that recording or that event or whatever it is. And it's the process that I think we have to embrace, this process of creation, and embodying it in ourselves, continuing to look at how we do it, how we're going to take it further. What about it do we love? What about it do we want to improve on? All the different things, because it doesn't necessarily just mean the same thing to everyone. For some, the process of improvement means learning to sing higher and higher and higher, so they can keep on going and going and going and going. For others, they couldn't be any less interested in that, and they're perfectly comfortable in a certain range of their voice, but being something else, more legato or something. And I think that process that we go into when we do these things ultimately reveals to us a lot about the shape that our artistry will take, and the thing that we can bring that is so different and unique. Maz, excellent. Greg, I've had iffy access to CT dominant range for a while. I've had it partially since April, but just recently started to get it fully. First of all, that's awesome. Like, congratulations that is working for you. So yeah, man, things are maybe a little bit in flux here. And maybe that'll settle down for you a little bit more once things really, really smooth out for you. Oh, I did not realize. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, I got you now. Now I know. Okay, right. Your CT dominant range is you're probably, if it's iffy getting up above that third passaggio, in the little snippets that I've heard, it's still the CT dominant area of your voice is quite wide still. I would expect that to narrow down quite a bit more as it becomes more reliable and consistent. So that could be also playing a role here. Maz, can you elaborate, please? What's the difference between belting and singing with really good projection? Okay, sure. Although belting and projection are two very different things. Belting is a mode of singing, sometimes referred to as entering the call of the voice, and you are effectively yelling on pitch. The throat profile and the way things that align themselves is different from the kind of singing that we do when we are going to make a smooth transition from thyroarytenoid dominant to cricothyroid dominant. The most notable aspect of this is that the thyroarytenoid dominant muscle is not allowed to lighten in order to allow the cricothyroids to engage. So you're entirely focused on keeping the thyroarytenoid dominant muscle as the main producer of tone. Really good projection has more to do with frequency response in the voice than it does with whether you are belting or you are singing with a transition in your voice, the thyroarytenoid to cricothyroid dominant. Really good projection relies primarily on what is called in classical circles as the singer's formant. And to the rest of us, that is a band of frequency between 2 and 5 K. So if you've ever been in a recording studio and you've said, well, I like the volume of the vocal, but I want it to have more presence, your engineer would have reached for the 2 to 5K band. Now, keeping in mind that most voices aren't really singing in that register. The male voice is usually singing, in the 800 hertz range, give or take, and lower, depending on the vocalist. That 2 to 5K band, however, is the singer's formant area, and it brightens up this resonant aspect of it. So, by way of demonstration, if I sang, I'll show you. Here's a good place. This is without it. It's fine. Now, I'll put that formant in there. And you can hear how the sound brightens up and it has a bit more projection. Opera singers use this because not only does it help the projection of the voice, but orchestras typically have a dip in their frequency response between 2 to 5K, and they just slot right in there. But it works for all of us. It'll work in your band. It'll work if you're singing with an acoustic guitar on your own. It'll work with a microphone. It'll work without a microphone. The singer's formant will do the most for your projection. Unlikely source, basketball. Jordan supposedly said he never worried about missing the last shot, and thus he really did. I like it. Yeah. Bike Man, Jeff, honestly, all I want is to play in an SF dive bar with a piano, and if I can transcend only the one person, then I've done my job. I love it. Martuni's, I think, is still doing that. I think you can still do Martuni's, but I'm not sure how much of a dive bar it is. It's kind of, it's not really divey. Perhaps Monday night at the Hotel Utah. I'm pretty sure they're probably still doing their open mic, and the Hotel Utah it's not really a dive bar anymore. It sort of feels like a dive bar, but it's legendary in San Francisco. And it's lovely. I've played there many, many, many times. It's lovely. Yeah, do that. That would be great. I would love to be there to hear that. As long as the accompanist doesn't stop playing in the middle of my song. Yeah, seriously, eh? I think this week's live event has really had this really cool Zen vibe to it. It's been super fun. Capone, can whistle make a better singer? I whistle a lot higher than I can sing. It's funny. I had a client years ago ask me to try to teach him to whistle. But then we never really got around to it. I think that any musical input of any kind just helps inform us more and more and more with our craft. So if you're whistling and going along to your tunes and stuff like that, I think that can't help but continue to develop your ear and your sense of intonation. But I think it would be important to try to match pitches with things. Try to keep it so that you're actually sticking with the music, because sometimes the whistling gets a little bit off key. And I suppose you could also kind of focus on your airflow and engagement and make that also as an airflow practice with that little resistance, because it'd be very, very little resistance by just whistling. The vocal folds would be out of the way. You'd really get a feeling of engagement and openness of throat without the vocal fold or epiglottis pushing back on it. And that could be really helpful in terms of tonal onsets, because we've got to be able to make that tonal onset from an open space up here, but engagement at the rectus abdominis muscles. It looks like things are winding down. It's 7 o'clock, which is when I typically say goodbye. So I want to thank you all again for a lovely, lovely, fun session. They keep on getting better and better and better, and it's so enjoyable to read the comments and answer the questions and get to interact with y'all in real time. So take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing. I look forward to seeing you in the comments sections and hopefully back here next week, because we'll be doing it all over again next week. Susan, thank you. Have a great week. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time, okay? Bye.